Hi, and welcome everyone to the Giving Students the Skills They Need for Professional Success in a Rapid Changing World. My name is Robyn McKenna, and I'm the Regional Business Director for McGraw. I'm very excited to introduce you today to our panelists who are very excited to hear your thoughts and questions. Before we kick off, though, I want to make sure we go through some quick housekeeping so that we can make sure that you can take advantage of having an interactive discussion with us today. So as you will see, you can see us on the screen, but also that there is 5 little buttons that are in red below. You'll be able to put the Q&A, all of your Q&A into the Q&A section, and make sure you put the live chat into the live chat section. Making sure that you put the questions into that Q&A section will ensure that we are able to have visibility of everything we need from, so that we can actually have visibility of all the questions from today. So without further ado, I would like to get started and introduce our main panelists. First off, we have Kate Daubney. Kate is the director of the Careers Group, the Federation Services at the University of London. She has worked with pre-18, higher education, advice education, employability strategies around the world. Some of the work and research in this space discussed today that she has written, has been published in the Higher Education Skills Work-Based Learning. Teaching employability is not my job. Redefining embedded employability from within higher education curriculum. She has also recently published a book with Open University Press, Careers Education to Demystify Employability, a guide for professionals in schools and higher education. And in her spare time as a board member, she's a board member of the Careers Wales. A very big warm welcome to Kate. Next up, we have Alexandra Mihai. Dr. Alexandra Mihai is currently the Assistant Professor of Innovation in Higher Education at Maastricht University. At Maastricht University School of Business Economics, she has created a competency-based coaching program to embed employability skills into the overall curriculum, which Alexandra will share some of the information about in discussion today. She has built up her extensive experience and knowledge in e-learning, curriculum design, and innovation teaching strategies from her time at the Fulbright Shulman Scholar at the Purview Center for Teaching and Learning at Yale, as a learning designer at University College London, as an associate researcher and lecturer at the Institute of European Studies in Brussels, and as a coordinator of the Center of Teaching Innovation at Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. And in her spare time, she shares her European perspective on education and technology through her personal blog and newsletter. We'll share that in the chat just in a minute. A very warm welcome and a big thank you for joining us today, Alexandra. Last up, but not least up, we have John Lees, one of the UK best-known career strategists and author of a wide range of business titles. He is the author of How to Get the Job You Love, one of the best-known career books by British authors. He has spent most of his career focusing on the world of work, spending 25 years training recruitment specialists. He has worked with a large range of organizations, including the British Council, Career Management Consultants, CIPD, HBOS, the House of Commons, HSBC, business schools across the UK, Orange, REC, the Associations of MBAs, just to name a few. I'm not going to go through the whole list, John. And he's a former chief executive of the Institute of Employment Consultants and founding board director of the Career Development Institute. Again, a very warm welcome to you, John, and a very warm welcome to everybody today. Now, let's get started, though, with the discussion, because I think that's why everybody is here today. So on to our first question. From each of your perspectives, what are the key employability skills you and your institution are being asked to support? And how have you seen technology influence these skills? Do you want to kick us off, Kate?
Thank you. So just to be clear before I start, I want to define careers and employability because these are not often completely understood terms. So when I talk about them, I'm going to mean that careers is the personal journey of self-discovery that we all go on as individuals throughout our working lives when we're making choices about what we want to do, about what our workplace values are, and how we see our careers journeys. But by contrast, employability is a kind of continually accumulating set of assets. And those assets are really around knowledge, skills, attributes, and experiences. And we accumulate those throughout our education and working lives. And they're there really to help us achieve our career goals. So I think with that in mind, I think one of the really big challenges that we face is that with an unimaginable future of work, nailing down any, let alone the key employability skills, is going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible. And there are a number of approaches that universities in the UK take, from creating shortlists of, say, 8 to 10 skills and attributes that both reflect the institution and the aspirations that university might have for their graduates, to in other institutions much more complex taxonomies of skills that academics can use to really surface and articulate to students the transferable skills that those students are innately developing in each of the subjects that are being taught. So I think my main point is that there's no right answer here, but I think the key has got to be making sure that students actually know that they are developing skills through their academic learning. Because that is happening, but students often aren't aware of it. And quite often, even if they are aware of it, they lack the language to describe those skills. So whatever skills an institution is identifying, I think developing their ability to articulate those has got to be a priority. However, I think there are some other ways to look at this problem, because I had the enormous good fortune last week to hear Professor Karina Juritsma speak. She works at the Future of Work Institute at Curtin University in Australia, and she was speaking at the Global Careers Services Summit that we hosted at the University of London last week. And the Future of Work Institute is proposing that rather than trying to nail down skills, we focus instead on actually actively embracing uncertainty and interconnectedness. And that in doing so, we develop the skills and attributes that will enable us to work more effectively in a very uncertain space. And Karina explained what those skills and attributes might look like, and how thinking more holistically rather than at a very granular level and finding key skills may actually help us have the confidence to navigate the unpredictability. And I also think that when it comes to technology, all our interactions with artificial intelligence are going to benefit from understanding the role that in particular critical analysis skills are going to play. And I think in particular developing and applying judgment skills on the outputs of AI is going to become really essential.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kate. And Alexandra, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks, Kate, for the really great introduction, clarifying the terms, because I think indeed we each mean different things when we think about those terms. So I think it was really, really important. And also for this idea of a more holistic approach, I'll share a little bit from our perspective. So at Maastricht University, our signature pedagogy is problem-based learning. So I think everything can be seen at least ideally through that lens. I'll explain a little bit more later. So of course, any active learning, but specifically problem-based learning, really brings knowledge and skills together, and they're really intertwined. And we try to have that reflected in courses, but also in curricula, in programs. But of course, that happens at to different degrees, let's say, in the different courses and programs. However, the skills that are mostly, let's say, practiced and developed, hopefully, through our courses are basically everything related to collaboration, group work, which really happens on a regular basis. This is how we learn and teach, actually, through very small group tutorials where students always work in groups. So it's just intrinsic to that arrangement, the modus operandi in a way, to learn in groups, but also partly independently. So we have self-regulated learning, independent learning periods, and then group work periods, just intertwined. And then, of course, critical thinking. You have to solve a problem. So that's the whole approach. It's really at the center of that, together with communication and facilitation skills, of course, as students need to be sort of taking a lead in their own and ownership of their own learning. In terms of framing it, again, something that resonated with what Kate said, we do it in a bit more holistical way. We don't really use employability as such, but we put it under the framework of global citizenship. which really can entail a lot of things. It can also be quite an empty term if we don't really operationalize it, but and many of our teachers, unfortunately, don't really understand what it means, but it basically includes all those skills and more, adaptability, all those things we will be probably touching upon in this session. And in terms of technology, just very quickly, something that sprang to mind when I saw the question, we are using, at least the marketing department in our faculty is using has been using VR for quite a long time now to develop skills. So to train students for interviews and for communication, various communication settings. So they've been doing that quite successfully. That is just one example. I think we are just discovering now, and in the wake of the pandemic, what technology can really do, especially for the skills part. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alexandra. And John, over to you.
Well, it's great to be here today. I do some work with university career services and also with business schools looking after the career needs of their students. But I'm coming at this from the perspective of many of the people that I work with as a career coach, who are often coming to me from any age, from 25 to 65. And so they're looking back at the early stages in their career and thinking about how they got their first job, whether that was a good role, and the whole career path. So a slightly different perspective. I'm going to just quickly tackle a couple of questions. The one about technology is really interesting to me because it seems to me that we live in a world where everything seems to be solvable using technology, including the kind of technology we're using today. But the reality of how people actually reach out, make connections and influence and get embedded in teams, particularly in a world of hybrid working, is that so-called soft skills are really, really important right now. So it's almost counterintuitive. We're talking about technology skills and sometimes forgetting that interpersonal skills make the world turn. Especially the ability to read a person or a situation quickly, to listen and understand, to absorb information, to communicate well. And the second point really is that we like to talk about transferable skills. And I sometimes think that it's good to take a different angle on that and not worry so much about what skills we mean by transferable skills, but to think about the process itself, to think about what makes skills transfer. Now, for me, it's a mixture of two things. It's a mixture of research and translation. So research means really understanding what skills are valuable to the audience you're trying to reach, whoever that is, even if you're just conducting an information interview, just starting to understand what skills are valuable in this context and how are those skills described. And that's the second word, is translation. Because transferable skills only really transfer if you put some work into them. They transfer when a decision maker understands them and finds them exciting. So that's my starting position.
Thank you, John. I think really interesting points around embracing uncertainty and thinking more holistically, and then thinking about how you embed that into, I think Kate talking about how students probably don't even realize that they're actually developing some of these skills and actually making them aware that they are developing these skills. I think embracing uncertainty is key to and essential, we've found, to being successful. Because the path that we're going forward is an uncharted path, and it is quite uncomfortable for many to do things that are uncharted. So I think that's a really interesting, I agree with that completely. That's actually a really nice way to look at it. And also I love the way that you've kind of built this in across the curriculum, Alexandra, with different knowledge and skills and actually looking at as a global citizenship approach versus employability skills. And John, you are so right. When you talk about, it's not necessarily technology but the enabling those interpersonal skills, being able to read people in different ways, it's a harder skill to have, especially when we're online. So really, really interesting points. All right, so moving on to the next question. Why is it important for students to have these skills before they enter the workforce? And how have you seen this change over the last 5-10 years? Shall we start with John this time? Flip it up.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we're very used to the idea of telling market entrants, and I'll say that because it doesn't really matter what age you are. If you're coming out of education and going into the workplace, you're a market entrant, and they're told, that organizations now want people who can learn things quickly and they have the right attitude and they fit in and all those kinds of things. The trouble is, it's quite hard to do something with that information. It's hard to understand what to do with those ideas. Even something like, how do you show the right attitude? There's a huge amount of decoding involved in that. So what I'm really aware of is that expectations have changed absolutely in the last 5 to 10 years. And as I mentioned earlier on, the other thing that's changed at the same time is the way that organizations encourage and allow people to interact. How the workforce operates is now very much around either hybrid working or sometimes entirely remote working. And that changes the flavor of everything you're going to do in terms of building relationships and starting to influence and be noticed, to become visible in an organization. So I find that profoundly interesting. One of the big effects of lockdown has been that we need to develop an entirely different skill set in terms of how you land in an organization, how you build relationships. And there's that really subtle thing about how you project an image of yourself so that people notice what you're doing without being inauthentic. How do you demonstrate initiative? How do you influence and show where you've added value in a way that feels authentic and natural? So I think my summary statement for all of that is that career management is a skill set in itself, and one we could always think a lot more about.
Very interesting. And Alexandra?
Yeah, absolutely. Career management is just a term that I'll keep in mind. I think generally for all of us, it's not really related to our students only. I think we all have to really think about that, and continuously. It's a process. So yeah, from our observations, because at our business school, we work a lot also with different companies in projects, they mentor students and do projects together. So we also are quite in touch with the industry and also not only industry, but different sectors. And they do tell us quite a bit about what they would like to have. Of course, they help us also train students in that manner and towards those skills, those more subtle, untouchable, let's say, skills that John mentioned. But what they do say, the general message is that they really want people who can collaborate efficiently, but also work independently efficiently. So really take initiative, but then also really in this more complex, usually intercultural, multimodal environments in which we operate. And I think this is this really subtle nuance mentioned before, and that's something that we can't. A lot of people would say, well, we can't teach that. And maybe it's true. We can't teach it as such. But I think it's a product that comes together with lots of other things that students do in the classroom and beyond the classroom, and that we can do together with them. And I think this is really important. And the other really important thing I wanted to mention is really the importance of learning how to learn. I think this is something that employers usually mention. They really want people that can really learn quickly. They can be thrown into something and really develop their own, metrics for learning the new things and really adapting to a new environment quickly. And I think this is a skill that we try again to integrate in the curriculum as much as possible. And I think a very important point here is reflection, because it's all metacognitive. So learning how to learn, I think that's something that really can help you throughout the career, but it doesn't come automatically. So I think this is one of the things that we need to really keep in mind.
I agree completely with all of those points. That I feel like you guys have a full task ahead of you with the amount of different skills and how they're evolving, and the way in which, I think there's definitely some practices that you're seeing at universities where they are teaching these skills probably indirectly, but actually how they apply to how they'll be successful moving forward in their careers is maybe the link part that we need to probably work on a bit. And Kate, over to you.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point about moving away from knowledge gain and more towards learning agility, lifelong learning, the ability to learn in depth. And I think that's part of a range of discussions that are taking place in recruitment at both post-18 and post-university level, which is really thinking about, what's the most effective way to get that message across to new employees as part of a recruitment process. I'm really pleased to see a much greater emphasis on inclusion and diversity as priorities in how employers recruit. But I think that's also led to some of these really interesting shifts that Alexandra was just talking about in moving away from that more conventional focus on grades and knowledge, and instead trying to enable applicants to actually identify and articulate the skills that they have, which reflect the profiles of the jobs that they want to do and that they're going to do. And I think that in general is a more inclusive approach, particularly I think if schools and universities can play their part in enabling students to learn how to do that through curriculum and experiences. And I think to Alexandra's point, can you teach this stuff? You might not teach it, but students can learn it because they have curated experiences and ways in which they can develop that. I mentioned we hosted the Global Career Services Summit last week, and it was very interesting. We had strengths-based recruitment consultancy Capfinity come and talk about this whole process of getting students ready for work, and they call it pre-skilling. And I think there's a lot of work that can still be done on the education side, and I might come back to that a bit later on. But I think what we are going to see is more evidence of that kind of long run-up into recruitment over the next couple of years. And I think actually when we look at things like chatbot tools, putting at risk conventional text-based application approaches like submitting a CV or a cover letter, I think we're going to see increased shift towards skills-based recruitment in person, and that's going to be a much greater emphasis. I think I'd also make a point here about students and graduates, that it's not just about getting into the workforce, but to tie back to something that John said, it's about progressing through it. And I like to think of that in a way as a kind of a fabric of continuity in your career skills. And I think this ties into how John was describing career management, because I think if we think about different skills as different kind of coloured threads, there'll be a kind of stunning rainbow of different skills that all learners bring when they're coming in with diverse subject learning, when they start their careers. But as they move through, those kind of threads are going to intensify into fewer different colours as sort of subject specialisms and knowledge specialisms sort of begin to focus in. And I think what's important is that those skills that perhaps aren't particularly relevant in one context will probably surface further on down the line. And so one of the things I think we could do really well in education when we work with students and pre-18 learners is just to support them to understand that that's going to happen all the time. That's kind of evolution that happens. So while a recruiter might kind of prioritize looking for particular skills for the first job of a student's life, in fact, that student, as they become a graduate, as they come into the organization, they progress through as an employee, whether in that business or some other business, is really going to keep developing those and all sorts of other skills in the role. And I would describe that as sort of getting on rather than just getting in. So I think that's a kind of useful way to help students overcome also that feeling of, I'm committing to one job for the rest of my life, whereas actually you're not. You're just committing to your first step, and everything you have, you're going to take with you.
I think it's a great point. That, coming into a role, you're going to have the foundations, but you're going to be continuing to learn and evolve, and roles are continuing to change as the needs and requirements are continuing to change. So that kind of acceptance that your skills, although you might have foundations, the key ones for right now, are going to need to evolve and change, and you're going to continue to learn as you evolve within your career, and even within specific, in that role, as the needs of the business change and evolve. We make that a key priority within our region to empowering. Literally, we have 4 goals, and one of the goals is empowering our teams and making sure it's a priority that they spend time developing themselves, because if they don't continue to do that, they'll fall behind. And I think that skill of just that continuous learning is something that is a good one to embed and make sure that they're harnessing as much as possible. Right. Next question. How can universities work to make this a whole of institution responsibility? And what is your university doing already in this area? Shall we start with Kate this time?
Thank you. So I'm actually in the really fortunate position, as you mentioned in the introduction, of leading a federation of university career services that sit under the University of London's federal umbrella. So what I can definitively say is there are many ways that this can be done. And I think that's actually a really good thing, because I think it demonstrates that universities are really evolving approaches that work for their students and for their course profiles. And in doing so, I think that also recognises the complexity of the employment market that students are now entering. Before I was in this role, I was head of careers and employability at King's College London, and I developed an approach to surfacing the transferable skills that are innate to all the different subject areas. Because as Alexandra said earlier, that kind of focus of acquisition of knowledge is something that we assess for quite often in education, but isn't really what employers are looking for. They're looking for skills, and they're defining roles, and they're recruiting on that basis. So as I've said before, I think we need to do a lot more to help students recognize that they have those skills and that they aren't just developing them when they go into the workplace. And, this is to John's point about transitions. How do you recognize that skill and then take it with you as you move forward? So at King's, what I did was to develop a taxonomy of transferable skills that helped academics feel confident that the academic rigor of their program was intact, but that students were also developing this richness of transferable skills that had a wider value for employers. And it meant that academics could celebrate curriculum and students felt confident that that longer term value was still there. And quite often these days I talk about value rather than employability when I talk to students in particular. Students don't necessarily engage with the word employability, but they will engage with the idea that there's some value, some longer term value from their program. I want actually, though, just to highlight another quite contrasting approach from the University of the Arts London, because actually it shows really nicely how many different ways there are to address this. At the University of the Arts London, which is a different federal institution with lots of arts and fashion colleges from across London, the head of careers there, Richard Sant, co-created with students and academics and creative arts professionals what they call a creative attributes framework. And they did this because they wanted to recognize that most graduates of creative practice courses are likely to be self-employed, or they're going to go and work in small and medium enterprises. So they identified 9 skills and attributes. So this sort of really reductive list I was talking about being quite difficult earlier, they've managed to do this really brilliantly because it reflects the student's journey from learner to practitioner to independent professional. And I really love this model because it recognizes the need to give students some core consistency in understanding their own development. But it also, I think, gives us a really powerful narrative for creative practitioners that says, look, in some contexts, that technical knowledge and specialist expertise is really important. So I think it embeds the idea that there are some core pillars that really support an individual's growth and development throughout their career.
I love that you said that it's focusing around the student profile, the different universities. I think that is essential. It's not a one-size-fits-all model, and tailoring it to the specific students that you have at university will enable its success, essentially. Alexandra, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really interesting to hear about these other approaches from various universities. I will share in a second what we do at Maastricht, at least in my faculty. Of course, there are probably different other initiatives in other faculties that even I'm not aware about. But I think before that, just 2 main ideas or pillars, let's say, on which an institution-wide approach should be or is based. And I think we'll come back to the same idea of skills not being taught in a vacuum, but basically together with everything else and developed and not taught, actually. And that means that ideally, again, we're talking sometimes a fairy tale or ideal world, they should be really tackled in a holistic manner at program level, so integrated in the curriculum, at course design, at curriculum design level already. So there should be a lot of thinking going into that by different actors within the university, faculty, management, staff, students. Again, the idea of co-creation that Kate brought before. Again, that is usually an ideal situation. It does happen in some universities, and I'm really happy to hear about other examples and to share something from our practice. But I think that's, it's not the easiest of processes. And then the other pillar, I would say, again, something that was mentioned before, especially by Kate, the idea that students own the process as well. So giving it back to them or really putting it in their hands to really create their own personal development story. So not only the knowledge they gain within their courses, but really this, studying at university is a personal journey that is made up by knowledge, skills, and lots of other things. But them putting together this puzzle and doing it explicitly, again, something that Kate mentioned, and I think it's super important that we are explicit about it as educators and as institutions, but also that students explicitly can speak about their skills, about their personal development before, throughout, and after university. I think this is super important. And what we do, so I'll share what we do at our faculty in our Master of Learning and Development in Organizations. So there are already people that think about that. Of course, it's a little bit biased, but so aside of all the other courses throughout the year, there is a sort of separate track, I would call it, which we called competence-based coaching. So coaching already says the way it's sort of run. And how we basically do it is that students choose in the beginning of the year. So this runs along the whole year, right? And there is no grading at the end. It's just pass or fail. But students start by choosing 4 competency areas where they want to work on. And within those competence areas, specific skills. So it can be, communication, academic skills, time management, project management. These are some of the areas. They choose the areas, and then they focus on specific skills within those areas. So again, consciously, with our support, I'll come back to that in a second, but consciously they do it. They decide, and they have to explain why. And this is a little bit tricky because even if it's not graded, it's part of their program. Sometimes they choose to work on skills that they are very proficient in, just because they don't want it to affect their grades, their diploma at the end. But the idea is exactly the opposite, for them to develop skills that they need to still work on. So this is a sort of dialogue we keep having with them. So they choose the skills, and then they work throughout the year within the courses, but also in their extracurricular activities, personal life, and so on developing those skills. And they have to document it throughout. And in the end, they have to submit a sort of portfolio, but it can be in any form. So it can be a podcast, it can be a video, it can be a real portfolio, e-portfolio, and that they have to then pitch at the end to us. They have to actually talk for 20 minutes about their development. And I find it very difficult from my perspective too. So I'm very impressed of how explicit the students can be at the end of this year, at the end of this process, about what they gained. But we actually focus, and we want them to focus specifically on how they will use what they gained in their future, not only employment, but just future development. And that's a difficult part, I must say. Because even though they become conscious and self-conscious throughout this process, it's quite difficult for them. So there they need support to link what they've done with imagining themselves in a future career and position. And just to complement that, they actually work together. So in the whole process, they work together with an academic coach. So we play the role of academic coaches. We each have a group, and with the professional coach. So they work with someone from a company or from an organization. Usually our alumni play that role. And we have regular meetings with each of them, both us as academic advisor, coaches, and the professional coach. So that's really supported. And we need to also really work on supporting the reflection skills, because it's all about reflecting while developing the skills. And again, that's not something that comes automatically. So yeah, it's a very challenging process for both us and the students, but also very rewarding.
That sounds wonderful. I'm sure many would love to replicate a process like that at their universities. All right, and over to you, John.
Well, as the one person here who doesn't work in higher education, it's important for me to be really clear that I think that universities and their career services do a great job around employability, as you've heard from my colleagues here today. In the career sector as a whole, what happens in higher education is known as being distinctive for its quality. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of new angles, new approaches, I do think looking again at transferable skills and how they transfer is important. And I'm encouraged by all the things I've heard so far. There's something I don't see, an absence that I'm aware of, and I sometimes think needs a bit more focus. It's nurturing a kind of curiosity. When I'm talking to people who are leaving university or business school, I find they're not terribly interested in the world of work. And I'd just like to see what we can do about that. If we can find a way that they can find work sectors and organizations and brands and technology and systems and even some of the people that work in these industries could find those as intellectually stimulating as their academic subjects, that's going to be a powerful engine, I think, to encourage curiosity, finding more things out, but also encouraging great questions. And if you ask great questions, of course, what you're doing is communicating employability. So something about curiosity seems really important to me.
Great, thank you, John. And I appreciate some of these questions are very institutionally focused. So, all right, now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the specific areas, kind of the niche areas that you potentially focus on, even though you've all touched students at different stages of their career journeys. Kate, if we start with you, from your work with the pre-18 group, what are some of the key challenges for students on their careers and employability journeys that you've seen?
Well, firstly, I think that they don't necessarily understand the distinction between careers and employability. And actually, the word employability is very rarely used in the pre-18 space. And it's not well understood, I think, when it is. And I think one of the reasons for that is that one of the biggest challenges we have in the pre-18 context, and I think this speaks actually back to the point that John was just making, is that learners are so focused on the acquisition of knowledge and the kind of accumulation of bits of paper and qualifications that, in a way, I think curiosity is knocked out of them. I think that just broadly, those wider transferable skills and attributes that they're also developing through their curriculum study just doesn't get recognized. So it's much, much harder for teachers and educators to actually surface those skills and attributes for learners. And yet, of course, as we've already discussed today, it's so important that actually that does happen. There's a really interesting emphasis, I think, quite often on the role of work experience in preparing learners for work. And I think we've perhaps had a question about that in the chat. But in so many cases and for so many reasons, learners often will have a barrier to getting work experience at all. So when we think about a narrative that says that qualifications and work experience are essential for entering the workplace, I think we suddenly marginalize a huge number of learners who might be at risk of thinking that they aren't employable. Perhaps they're not achieving with qualifications, even though they're in education. Perhaps they've got barriers to accessing work experience. And I think that's a really unacceptable outcome, that those learners might think that they're not employable, because it's not true. We're developing skills in all of those learners. But when we assume that, we're really reinforcing, I think, some existing inequalities and some social injustice. So when we then add on to that a really persistent narrative that does stick in government, unfortunately, about a linear relationship between the subjects of study and potential future career choices, which I think is really harming humanities and social sciences, we then have a really quite a big perfect storm of risk that I think could actually quite easily result in a large number of learners feeling that unless they take particular STEM subjects, for example, they're at risk of having nothing to offer the jobs market. And again, that's completely unacceptable. We can't be in that position. So I think if we were also able to talk about the transferable skills that every learner is developing across every subject area that they're studying at pre-16 and in pre-18 education, and we focus on that as an outcome of education rather than just qualifications, then I think suddenly we're able to make every learner understand that they are actually developing their employability, that that's the value that they're going to carry forward. And in that way, we make sure that no one is left out. And then if we look, as I've done in my research and practice, at all the different subjects taught in schools through that lens, what we actually find is all those learners at pre-16 and pre-18 are developing a massive richness of transferable skills. And in fact, in the taxonomy I developed from pre-18 curriculum, every single subject develops at least 50 distinctly different transferable skills. It'd be amazing if we're able to get that message across to learners and they'd feel really empowered. There is a huge piece of work to be done there. Very happy to talk to anybody who wants to try and do that piece of work.
Thank you, Kate. So it sounds like we need to almost rebrand what we've already, some of the work that's already being done, so that they understand what is that journey that they actually are taking at this point. And it's amazing to hear, and it's great to hear that so many different areas are being worked on already. So it's just how do we surface them and kind of show them how they translate into these types of skills. All right, I'm going to transfer over to Alexandra now. Alexandra, what Maastricht has been doing at the School of Business and Economics sounds like the ideal solution. But maybe for a university that doesn't have a program like this, where would you suggest they start if they're interested in rolling out something similar at their university?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because obviously, as I said, even for us, it's not always working perfectly. So there are lots of institutional issues, obstacles, not only institutional, but mostly institutional, that come in the way. But I think the first thing I want to mention is more of a mindset thing. And that is really, my first advice would be start by making the case for a better integration of skill development at an institutional level. So that's really a bit of lobbying, really getting it on the table and trying to also break the myth that higher education is all about knowledge. So what we just said before. So really saying, okay, skills are a thing. Be explicit about it in the learning objectives, in the reflections, in the assessment, everything. So really integrating it through the curriculum. And that's, again, a process, but it's also a mindset that needs changing. So I think getting the institution and the different actors at institutional level to talk about it is really the first thing. So otherwise it's always implicit, always somewhere in the back. Yes, skills, citizenship, whatever you call it. No, make it explicit, bring it to the fore. And at the practical level, again, something that we're trying to do with programs that don't have it, because not all the programs have such a track like we have it, but because they saw it, again, this peer pressure sometimes helps. So because they saw it for our program, they actually asked how we could develop such a skills trajectory, basically. And we are working together with a lot of, as now I'm putting my educational developer hat on. So we are working together with a lot of the other programs to actually develop such a skills track. And where it all starts is basically getting course coordinators, faculty to work together, to sit together in a room, discuss about their courses, how they puzzle together in a program. Sometimes that's already something completely new for them, to actually sit together and discuss about how their courses come together. And then deeper into how each of the courses and which skills each of the courses aims to develop. Again, being explicit about it, putting it on the table. My course encourages or works on writing skills. Which other course works on writing skills? Oh, yours and yours. Okay, then we can form a small task force and see how we can actually work together so that the student gets a coherent picture from their side, because we often don't empathize with the students. We don't put ourselves in their place, and they see such a chaos most of the times where we think it's a very coherent program. So sitting together physically at the table, now that it's possible again, with a lot of post-its and a lot, and then coming and creating that trajectory for skill development throughout the program. Of course, you can do it at the course level first, but then ideally, if you want to do it at the program level and then an institutional level, you need to have those people sitting together. And really, the crucial thing is to really talk about it and break those silos that exist at university in general.
Thanks, Alexandra. I think, as you said, making it a priority is key, because there's so many different competing priorities. How do you, if you make this a priority, getting everybody in the room together, discussing how actually the courses work together, which is interesting, and then bringing it, making sure that it all links somehow in some shape. That's, I think, some really useful insights. Now, John, as a career coach, what would you say are the most important lessons that universities should be imparting on their students, and how can they prepare students not only to get their first job, but to continue to climb the career ladder or create their own career path?
I'm going to duck the first part of that question very slightly, because I think it's probably above my pay grade. But what I would, first of all, I'd like to really pick up and echo what Kate just said about the current one-dimensional understanding about what academic subjects are most useful in terms of employability. I'm speaking as someone with 2 degrees in English, and I've always found them very useful. I was talking just in a seminar last night about a client of mine who had very successful jobs in telecoms and then later as a chief executive in the health sector. And his first degree was in classics. So, and recruiters would say to him, well, what's a degree in classics? How is that useful to you as a senior manager? And he said, well, once you've learned about the lives of the Roman emperors, you know everything to know about organizational politics, which I thought was a great answer. So he was one of those great people that really understood the intrinsic value of doing a degree which really makes you think, really makes you understand people or systems or organizations, and how that was impactful in the career that it enjoyed. So what would I say? I'd say in terms of the second question, helping to prepare students to get their first jobs and climb the career ladder. Yeah, that's really important. So there's something there about instilling a sense of career development and ownership of skills. There's something there about helping people land well in their first job and developing their careers from there on. It fascinates me, having worked in this sector for many decades, that people only use the word career, and when I'm talking about ordinary people in society, use the word career when they mean job change. So if they want to buy a book about careers, they're looking for a book that's about CVs or job interviews. So they think the word career when they're thinking about transition. They rarely think about it in terms of actually managing their own learning and development and growth and what the next 18 months is going to look like. So that's part of it, is sort of instilling that idea. Helping people move onwards from that is an interesting mix, isn't it? It's about self-awareness to start with. And one of the things I have found a challenge sometimes is helping people in every decade feel comfortable talking about themselves, describing their own strengths and their skills. And that's a piece of work in itself. But there's something about looking outwards as well. So in terms of landing well in an organization and managing a career path, a lot of that is about learning a new set of skills around mapping the organization, building relationships really quickly, and recognizing that you need mentors and enablers and champions and maybe a coach as well, all kinds of people that are required in this process. And you need to work out how to ask for things and to talk about where you've added value, but you need to do that in a way that feels authentic to you. And too many of the models we have around that require extroverts, dominant extroverts to do the talking. We need quieter, gentler, more authentic models of helping people say, this is what I need, this is what I'd like to learn, and this is how I'd like my career to develop.
Thank you, John. I think that's really great and insightful for the group. All right. I have a couple of questions from the audience that I would like to get to, so that way we can get to because we want to make sure that they feel involved in this discussion today. I have one from Alex James. At Exeter, we found that students who did a year in industry came back with a very different and more positive approach to their own learning. To what extent do you think that all HE qualifications should have some form of placement in them? Who would like to go first? I think everybody could probably chime in for this one. Kate? Great.
I'll jump in on this, although I'd be really interested to hear what John's thoughts are on this. I think a placement is a really important opportunity for exposure to the workplace. And I think the opportunity to actually understand what is my transition to work like, it is very important. My caveat always is that if we're assuming that, let's say, in the third year of a degree program, that a student has sufficient sort of confidence in what they want to do to be able to take advantage of that experience in the same way. And I think that's where you can have enormous inequality of experience. Across around 80 or 90 universities in the UK, we ask what we call career readiness questions every year. For all students, where are you on your journey? How clueless or certain are you feeling about your future? And I think we're at risk of suggesting that a student going into the workplace for a third year placement is very sure, or at least sufficiently sure of what they want to do to really benefit from that experience. And I think we can't make that assumption, but we can very carefully bookend an experience of a placement year for students who are perhaps less certain, to make sure that they can benefit. And I think that's what I would say is, yes, do you know what? I think probably it's a great solution. And I know this is much more common in other countries than it is in the UK. We're very behind the curve here. But let's do it in such a way that the student actually benefits with their career planning and their career management skills and their general readiness.
Yeah, can I just add to that, because I think I completely agree with Kate on that. I think we do. I think most of our bachelor programs in the business school actually include now a work placement, or at least an internship for a period, but longer or shorter. But I think it's there and it's obligatory. But I think it's really important, again, how that is integrated in the whole program. Where does it take place? How do we support them to go in there and to come back from there and to reflect on it? So I think those are really super important issues. And on the other side, what we also do, not really a work placement, but in some of our project-based courses, we work, as I said before, we work together with companies, and basically students act sort of like consultants to those companies. So in a way, it's not a full placement. They're still studying, but they do work with one of the future employers. So they do get a feeling for what that would look like, especially if they want to continue working as consultants, or at least start working as consultants in the beginning. But again, it's really important what they make out of it, and that it also still feels, even if it's a work placement or work project, that it still feels like that it still is a learning experience and not just thrown into the workspace. So I think this is our task in a way as educators and program leaders to sort of integrate it well.
I entirely agree. All placements are great. It's just about exposure to language and culture and values and just how organizations work. I would echo the idea of short placements. To me, even a good conversation with an organization is a kind of placement, and that's a mindset thing that's really important. It's just about that, cultivating that sense of curiosity, really. And I think students often really don't understand the opportunity they have, because it is a great door opener. If you say, I'm studying this subject, I'm interested in this, particularly if you're in a business school, I'm fascinated by, most organizations will talk to you because you're obviously not saying, please give me a job. So, it's there are so many opportunities to open doors to have conversations like that. And if you think of each of those almost as a kind of mini placement, I think, what have I learned out of this? What questions have I got? If I'm going to have a conversation with someone else in this sector, then you're going to get a lot more out of them.
One sentence here. We actually do that quite a bit with alumni. So I think one really useful resource you can use are alumni networks when your university has that. Not all universities are well organized on that, but I think that can be very helpful. So we have alumni talks, 1 or 2 or 3 alumni in a panel come and talk to the current students, and that they find really useful. Again, it's just a conversation, but it spurs their curiosity. They even open their eyes to some field or a sector that they hadn't thought about before as a result of their studies. So yeah,
totally.
Okay. Thank you. And I think we have probably enough time for maybe one more question. This is more of a general one, so I think everybody can probably chime in here. What would you like to see happening across your institution, and what are some of the blockers into achieving some of those activities or projects that you would like to see? So your magic wand question, I guess, if you could, and Kate, I know you're working across multiple institutions at University of London. So is there any kind of practices that you would like to see being embedded across or built on?
I think I'd like to see the parallel narrative, not the substitution narrative. There is still a desire to hold on to the idea that it's knowledge or skills, that it's curriculum or skills. No, it's an also narrative. This is also happening. We can have that really important conversation about value. I think when we take the E word out of it and we stop talking about employability and we talk about the values, a longer term value to students of their degree program, I think it's much easier to have a very inclusive conversation of everybody in an institution about how we support students to identify that value and take it forward at the many future stages. Career is not a linear thing anymore. It's multiple, it's complex, it's parallel, it's student-centered, it's got to be their choice. But let's at least give them ownership of that. And I do think that's a whole of institution conversation. That is not just the job of the career service. Gets off pedestal immediately. Get very cross about that.
And Alexandra, you've kind of embedded a nice competency-based program across. So you kind of have the ideal world many people probably wanting to get to in some cases. What's something that you would like to see moving forward?
I would actually like to see, again, more conversations, people making time and getting support to have these conversations on how to holistically look at skills and not just as an afterthought, basically. But most of all, actually, as I heard you all talk now, I think I would like us to find or to create mechanisms to involve students more in that as well. Because sometimes I feel like there is this big divide that we talk about how we should be acting, and then the students, we talk about them as well. But I don't feel like I have enough information often about what they would like, what their preferences, what their challenges, their worries are. And maybe I could have if I talk to my career service colleagues or or student counseling colleagues. But I feel like there should be more processes or mechanisms that really involve the students as co-creators. What's something that Kate mentioned before from University of the Arts, probably, it was this creative framework, really having students also really have a say in that at the more institutional level.
That's great. We one of the things that we've actually started doing is we have mentorships programs with senior leaders, but actually we're bringing in more junior roles in to discuss and to meet with our senior management to understand a bit more about the different dynamics of this new generation that's coming in, so that we understand the different values that they have, the different ways in which they're viewing the world, and the way, how they're looking at their careers, which I think is essential, because it's not just us telling them what we want. It should be a conversation to understand each other's and to get the most out of the relationship together. So I think it's really interesting that bringing the student's voice in is a key thing. I loved that Kate brought that up earlier, that is a really interesting point that we should be embedding it probably more throughout our decision bases and how we're building projects moving forward. And John, anything to add from your side?
Well, I think anything that encourages agency is important. It's moving away from passive models. And I have to say, speaking frankly, sometimes it really disappoints me. I've been to alumni events. I've been to events even at my old universities where you've got a panel of people with decades of experience in particular industries, and nobody in the room has any questions for them. So you think, okay, so what do we do to encourage that sense of, I want to take control, I want to ask my questions that are important to me, I'm going to know what the questions are that will matter when I leave this institution in, let's say, 18 months' time. I don't have a magic answer, but I'm planting the question.
Okay. All right. Well, we are just about at time. I just wanted to thank each and every one of you for joining the discussion today, and also our panelists for supporting this discussion and sharing some of your best practices and experiences. I hope everybody's taken away a bit of learning and a bit of food for thought for what they're looking to implement at their institutions moving forward. I guess stay tuned for our next session that will start in just a couple minutes time. But thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.